Welcome back everybody to our studies in metaphysics. In this penultimate lesson on the subject of ontology, what I'm going to do is talk about Quine's method of paraphrase. Now this is a continuation, just an additional element to the broader conversation that we have been having about ontological commitments and the process by which Quine develops ontological commitments within the broader realm of metaphysics. We've been talking about Quine's theories of ontological commitment, and this lesson we're going to talk about one of the elements relating to essentially the idea of ontology and the idea of ontological commitment, which is this method of paraphrase. What does the method of paraphrase entail for us as philosophers? Well, it looks a little bit like this. We have three basic steps that we can think about when it comes to the establishment of ontological commitments, examining and trying to come to conclusions about which sentences you take to be true. The first step is as follows. You decide which sentences you take to be true. Now, one of the things that's very interesting here, and as a point that we need to remember, is that the subject of ontology in the day-to-day life is sort of done after we have concluded the value of sentences that we believe to be true. We don't tend to have an agnostic approach towards the truth value of sentences until we have subjected that sentence through the rigorous process of ontological commitments. Rather, we have sentences that we believe to be true, and then we try and post hoc justify the truth value of those sentences by talking about ontology. So that is a sort of a backwards way of focusing on it, but of course this is the way that you would deal with things in day-to-day life. So part one is to decide which sentences you take to be true. Part two is to then regiment those sentences by converting them into first-order logic, and then by doing so you have dealt with this issue of regimentation. And then the third part is to commit yourself to all and to only those entities needed to stand in as the values of the bound variables in order to make those sentences true. So this is this third point is, or at least the 3 points here are exemplified and elucidated specifically by Elisa Ney's textbook. So fundamentally, what does this third point mean? Well, essentially what we have is we have a sentence which we take to be true. It is regimented into first-order logic, and then when we look at it through the lens of first-order logic, we see a truth statement, we see a truth value, we see a true sentence, okay? And what Quine is telling us to do is to commit yourself to all of the entities that are a part of that sentence, which make that sentence true. Okay, that stand in as the values of the bound variables in order to make the sentence true. So remember, when we regiment a thing by converting it into first order logic, we essentially take bound variables, okay, as the, quote, stand-in values for the sentence that we try to have. So the sentence itself is written in English, but then when it is regimented into first-order logic, we have a number of different variables and we have a number of different predicates and connectives and quantifiers that we use to express that sentence. You assign yourself, you commit yourself to those entities which stand in as those values, which make that sentence true. Now, this is fundamentally the three-step process for which Quine develops his understanding of metaphysical and ontological commitment. And the question we have to think here is, does this mean that Quine suggests that one would have to be committed to such ontology if subjecting propositions to regimentation? And what he does to address this issue is use a zoological example. He uses the example of the following sentence. He says here that some zoological species are cross-fertile. Okay, this is a sentence that has a truth value, and so you would be perfectly valid and perfectly reasonable and perfectly correct to assign truth value to it and to commit yourself ontologically to the truth of this sentence. Let's then commit this to regimentation. Let's then convert it into first order logic. This is what this sentence looks like in first order logic. What does this sentence say? Well, we have the existential quantifier here, which says that for some x, we have Sx and Cx, okay? So, what does this tell us? It tells us that the variable x, okay, for some x, the variable x will be a species, and the variable x will be cross-fertile. C refers to cross-fertile as the predicate of the representation of cross-fertile, and S is the predicate of the representation of species. So for some x, x will be a species and x will be cross-fertile. There will be some species that are cross-fertile. That is what this says. Okay, like I've just written here. This tells us there is some variable x, which is both Sx, which is both a zoological species, okay? It has the predicate of being a species, and Cx, which is the predicate of being cross-fertile. They will be both, okay? There will also be some that are not cross-fertile, hence why we don't have a universal quantifier, we have an existential quantifier. If it was a universal quantifier, then it would be incorrect, because then that would tell us that all zoological species are cross-fertile, which is obviously not true. So, continuing on then. This sentence commits us to the existence of species, if you look here, okay? And if we were to follow the Quinean method, the three-stage test that we have all the way up here, okay? We take a sentence, we decide a sentence which we take to be true, which is some zoological species are cross-fertile. I want to ontologically commit myself to that statement, okay? And in order to do so, I'm going to take it, I'm going to regiment it into first-order logic, which is what I've done, and then what I'm going to do is take this first-order logic sentence, and I'm going to commit myself to any of the entities which are represented in first-order logic, which make that sentence true, which are the bound variables which make the sentence true, okay? So I have the sentence, step 1 is the top line, I've then regimented it, which is step 2, into first order logic, and now I am going to commit myself to all of those variables, to everything that is part of that sentence that makes that sentence true from a logical perspective, through first order logic. One of those things, however, is my ontological commitment to zoological species, to the existence of zoological species, because this is telling us that there is some x, and that some x will be a zoological species, and B, cross-fertile, both at the same time. That's why we have a conjunction. So this automatically means that we have to commit ourselves to not only the cross-fertility of some zoological species, but also to the existence of zoological species specifically. But then the question then is asked, the question that is then begged is, well, it commits us to the existence of zoological species, but which zoological species? How do we then go further? Well, because the problem we have now is that species, the idea of zoological species, the sort of taxonomy of species and the taxonomy of the animal kingdom, for example, is fundamentally an abstract concept. The idea of a cat or the idea of a dog. We have definitions of these things, but these are generally quite abstract. The word species and the word zoological species, while a little bit more specific than just species in and of itself, does not commit us to a specific existence of a specific thing. One may take a taxonomical view, where species are groups of types of animals. So we're not talking about an individual cat, we're talking about the taxonomy view. The taxonomical view wouldn't be representative of an individual cat or an individual dog, it would be of the category of cat, the category of dog, which is defined from a taxonomical perspective. So we define a cat as having whatever the characteristics of a cat is. This is similar to a set theoretic viewpoint, where species are essentially the set, where we have the set of all things that are cats, or the set of all things that are dogs, and then the entities that are represented therein are the individual cats, or the individual dogs. My dog Morgan, for example, is a specific dog, but it is not the set of all things that is dog, okay? She is, a specific representation of an entity within that set. That's a set theoretical perspective. Well, fundamentally, Quine doesn't like any of these ideas, and so he objects to the existence of abstract entities, as we've already made reference to. So how does he reconcile this idea, that the idea of a species is an abstract entity? And so the method of paraphrase seems to, or at least this ontological commitments method, seems to commit us to something that he doesn't want to commit himself to. Well, this is what the method of paraphrase essentially tries to get around. So, the proposition theoretically commits him to the existence of what would be described as an abstract entity, an abstract idea, a set of all things that we would describe as being a species. But Quine rejects this viewpoint. Instead, Quine either can reject the proposition, or he can accept the existence of abstract entities, okay? So he can either reject the truth value of the statement, some zoological species are cross-fertile, or he can accept the existence of abstract entities. You can't do both, fundamentally, if you want to do this from this perspective at the moment, okay? And obviously, it doesn't seem to make sense to want to reject the proposition, given that it is something that you can and should be ontologically committed to. There are cross-fertile species. But if you're somebody who doesn't accept the existence of abstract entities, how can you do this? Well, what Quine suggests is that the process of regimenting the sentence from the English, from some zoological species are cross-fertile, to the first-order logic for some x, sx, and cx, this commits one to paraphrase the sentence to avoid quantification over entities. So when he says that there are some species which are cross-fertile, okay, what he is simply doing is paraphrasing all the specific species, okay? And the point of reference that we have, therefore, is not necessarily got to do with the fact that we're talking about the species, we're talking about the idea of cross-fertility. It's a little bit of a slippery method. It's a little bit of a method that is debated, and I feel like I should go into it in more detail in future lessons' time. But for now, we'll just end on this view here on the method of paraphrase, and we will talk in the next lesson about the concept of meta-ontology before we finish and start moving on to the next major topic within the subject of metaphysics.